Ciao a tutti amici del Mondo di un Pad, proviamo insieme The Last of Us parte 2 Remastered, i livelli perduti, il contenuto che più di tutti mi incuriosisce. Vai, il Drachman. Ok, dai.
The reason we added this section is there are a few sequences, and we picked the 3 of the best ones that we cut from the game. You know, often we build a game that's much bigger than what ends up being the final product. They were months away from being finished, but we wanted to give you an insight of what it's like when we built the game, because often we have this whole thing constructed and it doesn't have final art or audio or dialogue. And here you get to see the building blocks of what it's like when we first string a bunch of these levels together. This is the intro to the first deleted level, and this one is the roughest of the 3. We wanted to show more of how Jackson operates. So this is the festival where Ellie ultimately kisses Dina. This sequence would have come very late in the game as a flashback sequence while you're in the farm with Dina. And we wanted to show what is the rest of Jackson doing, and wanted to put on the stick, make it interactive. So you could see when you're outside, there are all these almost like carnival games that you can play. You could mix drinks, you could play with these kids that are playing a sort of clicker Marco Polo, sit down and listen to conversations. And all the different interactions were first or second pass, very, very early passes. The building blocks are there, but nothing is final. And ultimately, while we were very excited by this sequence, it's pretty fun and lighthearted. It just slowed things too much as we're barreling towards the end of the story at this point. So again, reminder, rough, missing audio, missing animation, missing gameplay tweaks, missing dialogue, but pretty representative of what it would have been. So enjoy.
Enjoy. Lui rimarca sempre che è molto grezzo. Che cazzo vedi in testa? Allora, stiamo giocando. E questo non mi sembra grezzo.
Originally, this level was going to transition us to farm. We would go all the way through to the dance, where Ellie and Dina share their first kiss. Then we would play through farm, and when Ellie plays the guitar at night, she would remember the Seth incident. So, the opening for this was a little tricky. We needed it to match at least a little what you might expect emotionally coming from prior beats, because we were already purposefully disorienting you in time and space. Remember, you just came from this huge fight. To jump straight into it would have been a little too jarring. After some back and forth, we rooted it in Ellie's nerves, calling back to her hands shaking in the theater. But this time, for a much more innocuous reason we'll find out later. She's nervous because she has a crush on Dina, who is the only reason why she's here at the dance.
Ok, allora io andrò veramente lento, quindi credo saranno delle parti noiose. È come se noi le stessimo vivendo assieme, quindi qua seduti in questa stanza, quindi sarà così, non correrò, anche perché non ne ho la minima intenzione, perché amo questi contenuti, voglio assaporare tutto di questi livelli perduti. O comunque quello, diciamo, più possibile. Allora, vediamo qui.
Something we really wanted to do was highlight the way their lives had turned upside down since she went down this path. We had this idea of recontextualizing all of our usual gameplay mechanics.
Se amate questo tipo di cose, però, questo è il video giusto per voi.
Workbench, door bashes, throwable weapons, and even the infected, which is my personal favorite. Peppered throughout the level are moments of levity or shared history, all the while seeing how happy and mundane they all were before her huge revenge odyssey.
A me questo non mi sembra grezzo, ragazzi. Cioè, il Drachman ha ribadito più volte è grezzo, ma questo non è grezzo. Cioè, è la qualità di tanti giochi che stiamo giocando diciamo, di questi tempi. Cioè, se questo è grezzo, ragazzi, per Naughty Dog... Bella Jackson, che bella. Mamma mia. Andiamo qui.
The makeup artist is pretty simple. It's one of those little in-game scenes we peppered in to make it feel like Ellie had roots in the town. Hallie, our writer, mentioned that in her mind, an ex-girlfriend of Ellie's tattooed her arm to cover up her scar. So we figured this might be the only time you get to see that. We wanted to hint at it and allude to it and make it feel like there had been so much more that had been happening and so much more that Ellie threw away.
Ok. Cat. Se avete giocato The Last of Us parte 2 sapete chi è Cat. Se avete letto soprattutto il diario, perché se non l'avete letto lo nominano un po' così, però se avete letto il diario comunque sapete. Ok. Siamo qui.
It is not a festival without one of these throwing games.
Ok,
This one,
vabbè.
of course, uses our throwable system where you're often chucking explosive things or stunning things, but for a more wholesome purpose, although some people take this game really seriously. A fun aspect of this is if you did well, you could win a toy here. Ellie would place it in her pocket. If you had done this, you'd find the toy with JJ, the baby, later back at the farm. When we cut this, the toy made it through anyway because it was so cute. It is the same one you see on the tractor at the farm. Ollie the elephant.
Ok. Sì, sì. L'elefante di JJ.
This is one of my favorite sections because I think that it achieves both the slice of life aspect of Jackson while also being a stark reminder of how dark the world that they live in really, really is. To attract attention and curiosity, one of the
Molto.
kids was supposed to make this adorable, messed up little clicker impression, and the others would giggle. We tried a version where if you got close enough, the kid might try to follow you a little before turning back. Since clickers are blind and move by echolocation, for this game of messed up tag, Ellie must close her eyes and listen for when the children give themselves away. The thought was that these kids are in relative safety. They still grow up with the dangers of clickers and runners, and all those lessons would embed themselves in the games that they play. When the festival got cut, they tried to preserve this moment and move it to the front of the game where the snowball fight is, as a tutorial. However, being in the headspace of a clicker doesn't really teach you how to deal with them. Eventually, it evolved, and they instead made the snowball fight, which was, I think, way more effective. For me, it's character illuminating that not only does Ellie know this game, she plays along. There's a familiarity with the kids that's really nice to see, especially because it's such a difference from the Ellie we see later, who has a sort of hollow normalcy that she's trying to get with
Beh, però
JJ,
c'è un motivo.
but kind of fails.
C'è un motivo per cui è in quella maniera. Però, allora è bello, però io ragazzi non avrei tagliato, cioè nel senso non cambio nulla del gioco originale. Cioè questa parte, dovevamo giocare noi questa parte all'inizio, quindi Ellie che gioca con i bambini, che loro fanno i clicker. Però secondo me è molto molto più bella la versione originale dove loro giocano con le palle di neve. Ce la trovo più... non lo so, meglio, non lo so, questa... Ci starebbe anche, perché comunque esorcizza un po' il mondo dove loro vivono. Comunque fanno cose reali, perché comunque i bambini comunque quello che vedono fanno. E quindi ci stava. Però io non avrei cioè non l'avrei messa neanche io. Cioè, quella versione delle palle di neve la trovo molto molto più a fuoco, secondo me, poi ognuno. Però secondo me quella è molto molto più a fuoco. Un po' che fa? Niente. Niente, si sedono. Ok. Non c'è più nulla.
There's a hidden spot at the back that was just a bit of fun. It was highlighting Jackson's normalcy with something we would find in a real world. In the back, you would find teenagers finding some alone time with each other in a dark corner of a party. It was rewarding the player for peeking into a hidden corner, but ultimately redirecting them back to the festival. We also had versions of them smoking weed here, despite Maria's consternation, probably having gotten it from Eugene.
Il mitico Eugene. Il mitico Eugene. Questa musica a me mi mette tantissime emozioni, tante emozioni, troppe emozioni. Allora, ora che devo fare? Qua non posso andare. Maria. Tommy.
In this second deleted level, which is an extended sequence of the sewers in Seattle, this comes on the heels of where Ellie goes into a building and she survives an attack by stalkers and gets thrown out of the window and gets swept away by the current. And then we cut this section that used to be there in the final game. Now you will get to play it. So this was a way to get a bit more interesting puzzles, interesting traversal, figure out how Ellie can navigate the sewers with the fighting current. Ultimately, with a lot of these levels and these sequences, the reason why we cut them more for pacing purposes. But here it is for you in this very kind of raw form that part of it will feel finished, parts of it will feel like assets are missing as far as audio, animation won't be final, but it's a glimpse into what a game looks like when it's months away from finishing. Enjoy.
Mamma mia, quanto è bello, quanto è fatto bene questi livelli. Questo contenuto è stupendo, ragazzi. Io lo vorrei per... mamma che bello. Lo vorrei per ogni gioco di mio interesse, ragazzi. Pagherei anche 30 euro. Senza problemi. Adoro il dietro le quinte, fa capire molto di come si sviluppa un videogioco, di come lavorano i game design, ovviamente gli sviluppatori, i level designer, il reparto audio, il reparto animazioni, tutti ragazzi, perché c'è un grande lavoro dietro e purtroppo in questo momento storico non si capisce, perché sembra che i giochi si fanno così, schioccando le dita, ma non è assolutamente così e questi contenuti aiutano tanto il pubblico a capire questa cosa. Veramente tanto. Allora, anche qua grezzo, ma a me mi sembra una figata, sinceramente. Ok, sei arrivata Ellie. Allora Ellie, andiamo. Ellie, gira. Ok.
Oddio, schiatta.
Questa è doppiata?
Rivediamo la sua.
This level, internally known as Find Nora,
Trova
was quite
Nora.
long in duration as we had to make Ellie traverse a far distance to the opposite side of downtown Seattle. The sewer section was originally longer than what we released the game with, approximately 10 minutes more. This was one of the few areas of the game that used water flow as part of a traversal puzzle. The player has to go upstream to use the current to get to the platform to reach the other side.
10 minuti?
We mostly cut this mechanic game wide, however it remained in essence in the section swimming to the aquarium as Ellie when you were avoiding the waves.
Cioè 10 minuti sono tantissimi, cioè questa parte durava niente nel gioco poi finale. Vediamo, andiamo, vai lì. Ok. Ah, lì c'è qualcosa, quindi ci vado per forza. Vediamo. Ok, ce l'ho fatta.
The ladder acts as an immediate goal for the player, but being able to climb out is not going to be so easy.
It's
keep levels interesting and engaging, we alternate between positive and negative values the player experiences.
Certo.
Here, it's a positive to have found a ladder, but then a negative to discover it's
Perché uno
not the solution.
bestemmia.
But then another positive to identify the next short-term goal of the doorway. By alternating between these opposing values, we give players what they expect, but not how they expect it.
Ok. Certo, perché poi uno
The ladder
bestemmia.
acts as an immediate goal
Ok,
for the
beh.
player, but being able to climb out is not going to be so easy.
Allora, quindi devo
To keep
rifare
levels
tutto il
interesting and
percorso,
engaging,
penso.
we alternate between positive and negative values the player experiences. Here, it's a positive to have found a ladder, but then a negative to discover it's not the solution. But then another positive to identify the next short-term goal of the doorway. By alternating between these opposing values, we give players what they expect, but not how they expect it.
Allora, vado lì. Comunque la fisica già c'era. La fisica del personaggio è meravigliosa. La Stovaz ha una fisica impressionante. E già c'era qua.
When players reach the doorway and enter into the room, they're faced with a dead end. The real reason for this dead end room is that on the reversal, when exiting back out of the doorway, players are faced with a route onwards. A pipe that they'd not been able to see when they were swept past it on the way in, and something that was hidden from view when on the side platforms. The intention here being that the only
Ok.
option is to go off the standard path in order to search for a way out.
Quello. Vai è lì.
Tiratemi fuori da qui.
Piano piano, Ellie.
Throughout the rest of the level, we also use light to indicate to the player that they were heading in the right direction. At
Ok.
each turn, however, we block the direct route forward. Players would know that they just have to keep finding alternative paths, promoting those feelings of being desperate and trapped. We slowly introduce the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes and crouching in these tight spaces. This is to slowly build up to and encourage the player to climb into such a small pipe that they'd have to be crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the
devo
desired
uscire.
route they need to take.
Devo continuare a salire.
Allora, vediamo qui.
We added a tiny space just to reward the player's exploration with a pickup item, and we made sure it was something that made sense that you'd find in this area. A canister and all the garbage that had been washed into the sewers from the surface.
Non perdere la testa, Ellie.
In order for the player to feel cramped, claustrophobic and desperate, we'd been enforcing the traversal mechanics that allow for a tight environment which promote these feelings. We introduced the use of the squeeze through so that we can keep the player feeling enclosed and tight, but without repeating the same geometry. Here we change from low ceilings with wider walls to high ceilings and tight walls to change up the spatial pacing and keep the level from repeating itself.
Ok. Questa parte è molto lunga, eh?
Fanculo, universo. Non voglio morire in questo posto di merda.
Originally, we had the water line much higher here, so players had to swim through this tight tunnel. However,
Okay.
from watching user test feedback, it was occasionally causing people to discount the route entirely and turn back on themselves. So to avoid any risk of this happening in the final game, we present a lower water level so the tunnel is easy to see and commit to using. Although this isn't as impactful without the prone swim, it's the better decision as it means a smoother experience for the player with no backtracking frustration.
Quindi così.
As we surface from the water and over the crest of the slope, we reveal what is further in this tunnel. A clicker that has sprouted and the fungus has grown on the sides of the pipe. It was great to see people who user-tested this area
Okay.
becoming increasingly worried as we forced the player to squeeze past the fungus and inches away from the clicker's face, all the time not being sure whether the clicker might be alive or attack them. Although we aren't as cruel as to force a clicker attack in such close proximity, we do have a payoff for this moment. This clicker momentarily turned into Joel to show Ellie's PTSD from what happened to Joel at the start of the game. Ultimately, we decided to save this moment for the farm level, as it was more impactful there because it could become the centrepiece of that experience. Whereas in the sewers, we weren't able to make it as much of a narrative point and give it the breathing room and reaction time that it deserves, given the tight space.
Certo, cioè vedete quante cose cambiano durante lo sviluppo di un gioco, le idee. Cioè questa idea, se fosse stata messa qui, magari giocandolo, però dove è stato messo per il gioco finale è impressionante, dà tutt'altro, cioè guardate, tutt'altro significato, come ci ha detto lo sviluppatore. Vediamo. Madonna. No. Madonna mia. Mamma mia. Ah, mamma mia.
Ah, merda! Ah!
Ok. Non hanno fatto bene a metterla dov'era. Però anche qui, giustamente dopo aver giocato il gioco.
As you traverse through such tight spaces leading up to this. So changing the environmental pacing makes it begin to feel like we're coming to the end of Ellie's ordeal. An earlier iteration used the current that we'd shown at the start for a slightly tougher traversal puzzle to conclude the sewers. The ladder was clearly visible from most of the area, but the player was faced with a fast-flowing torrent of water they couldn't cross. If the player attempted to jump into the water, they were not able to swim across the ladder due to the water's speed. But instead, they had to traverse the pipe running along the top of the space in order to get across the water.
Allora.
This is the first time we get to see stalkers that are embedded into the walls. So this optional room is a nice little early extra that the player gets if they explore. We also use the pickups to lure players over to be close enough to trigger the stalker's attack. This caused quite a few jump scares and user testers who played our game before its release.
Oh. E muore.
Benissimo.
Ok.
Using this pipe was retained in the iteration we shipped with, as it's the last of the extreme methods Ellie has to undergo in order to escape the sewers, and what she will go through in her pursuit of revenge. The last ladder climb is quite lengthy, and although we could have trimmed it down to a shorter climb, we liked how this last segment of the journey built anticipation for whether there was success at the top or not after all you've been through. Ultimately, the ladder exits out into the subway station, which is how it connects in the final game. Ellie then has to find her way to the hospital from here, crossing paths with the scars for the first time.
Ok.
For this third and final deleted level, what we call the boar hunt sequence, this was a sequence pretty late in the game. It was right after the whole Seattle Abby sequence where Abby spares Ellie. And then we wanted to come back into Ellie's story, but keep it a bit mysterious of how much time has passed, where is Ellie now? So we're coming in on Ellie and she's following a trail of blood. And we wanted to mirror in a way
Belle, le
the
concept art
deer
sono
hunt sequence
bellissime.
from the first game, but this time do it with a boar. And there's something with Ellie that now she can't let go of this violence. She's pursuing it even against this innocent animal. This was another opportunity to show how the violence that Ellie has experienced, the violence that she witnessed being afflicted onto Joel, is still sticking with her. And she's still experiencing these PTSD moments.
Che bella.
This was a sequence that was pretty far along and was cut pretty late in production. Parts of it are still really rough, but the gameplay, the building blocks were all there. I think you'll have fun to see, like, again, a rough, unfinished sequence that you can play. You can see all the way to the end, and including a cinematic that we end up cutting. And the remnants of the sequence ended up being mentioned in Ellie's journal. So this part of the story that we developed still made its way into the game as kind of optional stuff that you could read about, but here you get to experience it. So as a reminder, this is pretty rough, months away from being finished, but you get to see it now.
Sempre lui mette le mani avanti, però vi ricordo che la qualità del gioco è quella, lo sappiamo, che gioco abbiamo giocato, che capolavoro è The Last of Us parte 2. Mette sempre le mani avanti.
So the boar hunt was one of the hardest levels for me to work on. It was a huge challenge with the systems that we had, and we kept trying, but it never felt quite right.
Ok.
Originally, the level happened after the Jackson Festival, which also got cut, but before Farm. Once the festival got cut, it became the prologue to Farm. The intended experience is that we jump forward in time after the fight with Abby in the theater. We don't know where Dina is. We likely assume she's dead because she was just bleeding out. Ellie is alone. Her hair is short. So maybe this is the future or the present. And she's hunting. Hunting who? Abby still?
Comunque è fatto troppo bene. Lui mette sempre le mani avanti, è grezzo e di qua, ma è spettacolare. È spettacolare. Io vorrei tanti giochi che abbiamo giocato sino ad ora così grezzi, ma così però, non come quelle porcherie che abbiamo giocato. Last of Us è un qualcosa di pazzesco, pazzesco. Vediamo.
In early iterations of the fight, it was more arena-like. The player slowly whittles down the boar's health. Ellie gets more visceral and more vicious. We get a little worried about her. As the boar gets weaker, more panicked, more feral, and we start feeling sympathetic to the boar was the hope. In all of these iterations, especially of these wider areas, it required custom AI and scripting to make sure it continued to feel organic as an animal, but we really needed it to do specific stuff. It needed to be able to close distances really, really quickly. It needed to charge to attack, but we wanted the feeling of hunting, so we needed to track it down from afar. And we also needed to discourage the player from attacking the boar when it's that close, or it would kind of turn into this melee kerfuffle. How do we do this in our world while keeping the boar believable?
Quando sei bella, Ellie. Allora.
We must have gone through 5 or 6 iterations of the boar fight and all, and every single time it changed pretty drastically. We split it into clear phases, where one was like all long range. We tried another where you're getting close and you get the jump on it quite literally. You're jumping off of a rock to attack it. And then finally, we tried a bunch where you almost sort of go around a bunch of trailers and try and wrestle it. We uncovered after some time that taking down a boar over several phases felt very laborious and a little dramatic. It was comically long. It felt too boss-like, a little too gamey. We decided to cut the first few phases, and we opted for a cold open after the boar had already been hurt off screen. So that allowed us to focus on feeling like we're closing in on prey and to introduce the boar when it was at its most dangerous. Already hurt, already feral, much too close for comfort. And so the thinking was it would bring us more into Ellie's mindset. Is this really hunting for food, or is she hunting for some other reason?
Trovato.
Mamma mia, sarà brutale sta scena, sicuro. Sarà brutale questa scena. Cioè, guardate che spettacolo però. È grezzo.
The gas station was built to highlight the boar's destructiveness. Since it's cramped, the boar feels larger. We also feel trapped with it, though perhaps it's trapped with us. When it charges, it gets to us quickly, so we must be on our toes. This made it more aligned with Ellie's sort of hunting for trouble mindset. Listening became more important, as well as moving around slowly so it didn't hear you. Could you spot it before it saw or heard you? And could you get a shot off quickly enough so you could dodge out of the way? Or is the shot worth the cost after? It feels like a gamble. By the end of the fight, everything would likely be in shambles. The boar would burst through the back, and Ellie would follow it and finally enact revenge.
È passato da qui.
Ok. Non vedo niente. Cazzo!
Vabbè. Oh, ok. Eccolo. Vieni qui. Ah. Guarda dov'è. Guarda dove si mette. Vabbè. Vieni, vieni.
Non puoi scappare.
Allora.
The boar kill was supposed to be anything but glorious. With the boar whimpering at the back of the gas station after Ellie's relentless hunt. After this, hearing the drone that we kind of come to associate with Ellie's trauma, we would
No,
hard
per
cut to the street
favore.
where she's washing her hands and holding rabbits that she hunted, about to return to Dina. And there would be no mention of the boar.
Madonna mia, ragazzi, io sono devastato. Prima per le fogne di Seattle, adesso per la caccia. Comunque abbiamo finito i livelli. È stato, ragazzi, intenso, intenso, bellissimo. a parte questi due livelli, a me è piaciuto molto di più la festa di Jackson e la caccia. Come emotività, che mi volevano farlo un po' piangere, Fogne e la caccia ovviamente. Però ragazzi, sono dei contenuti meravigliosi che io spero di trovare in tantissime produzioni. Già dal day one, forse è impossibile, però anche a pagamento a 10 euro, a 20 euro, magari non 3 livelli, ma anche di più dello sviluppo di un videogioco. Perché ragazzi, ripeto, in questo periodo storico, diciamo, ci si interroga, si dice che le cose siano facili, che il pubblico vuole le cose subito, però ragazzi, come avete visto, c'è tantissimo lavoro dietro, tantissime idee che poi vengono o messe o scartate, quindi dopo anni di lavoro queste idee vengono poi scartate per prenderne altre, quindi c'è tantissimo lavoro di scrittura, di game design, il level design, come lavorano nelle aree del gioco, le idee appunto, c'è le animazioni, c'è veramente tanto, tanto, tanto. Io spero che questi contenuti ovviamente vengono messi in tantissimi giochi e, e che il pubblico capisca cosa significa sviluppare un videogioco, perché non è solo abbiamo il gioco, giochiamo e basta, c'è tantissimo, tantissimo lavoro dietro. Detto questo, ragazzi, a me mi sono piaciuti tantissimo questi contenuti, bellissimi, veramente belli, perché appunto vediamo cosa c'è dietro un gioco. Eh, Meravigliosi, meravigliosi davvero, per 10 euro. eh, Secondo me sono la ciliegina sulla torta per capire veramente come è stato sviluppato The Last of Us parte 2. Comunque, eh, io spero che vi sia piaciuto il video, fatemi sapere se appunto vi sia piaciuto, se avete preso l'upgrade o avete preso la versione, se non ci aveste mai giocato, la versione boxata, quindi quella dei 50 euro. Comunque fatemi sapere, noi ci vediamo in un prossimo video, ciao a tutti ragazzi, alla prossima.